Okay, good morning, everyone. Welcome to the Sariputta Das Richard L. Thompson lecture series based on mechanistic and non-mechanistic science. We are on chapter 8. Can you show the book?
Oh, can I see?
Yes. Okay, and then today we have
IVF solution.
Dr. S.E. Kreitzer, Sthita-dhi-muni, presenting this chapter for us today.
Ready?
Yes, go ahead.
Okay. All right. So Sariputta. All right. So I did my studies in history of science, and my dissertation was on the history of biology, specifically evolutionary theory in the 20th century, and the theme was science, ideology, and worldview woven within the doctrine of evolution, I guess. Or I didn't say it that way, but that's how it's said in this book, Doctrine of Evolution. Of course, you can hear me, right?
Yes. Can everyone hear us? Just
because I have this thing here. I can't hear them.
It's picking up from here.
Okay. No, I can hear them. Okay. Oh, I thought I did. Okay. So Sariputta wrote this in 82, 81. No, he published it in 81. I was actually in Philly at the time as a much younger manifestation of myself here. I remember he was laying it out with Yamaraj there in that BTG house on Greens and Lincoln Drive. They were getting help. Ajay Adwaita Swami was there. Sariputta, we did a lot of research in Sariputta. This was his effort to sort of fulfill an aspiration of the early BI in the 70s to put together some kind of comprehensive book. And that, with dealing with a variety of topics, that didn't quite come together as a unified BI effort. So Sariputta took it on, took the responsibility, or took the initiative to do something that would sort of fulfill that project that they had been discussing with Prabhupada back in the day. So there was a chapter here on evolution. This came out around the time that there was a lot of excitement about punctuated equilibrium. Punctuated equilibrium had been discussed for some time. I think it was first brought up. Actually, Ernst Mayr mentioned that there was some very early papers kind of touching upon it. But when you got to the 70s and 80s, was it Stephen Gould and Niles Eldridge were published some papers on it. So the thing with punctuated equilibrium, it's sort of addressed that there wasn't a there is a continuous fossil record of gradual change, as Darwin had initially proposed, that over long periods of time, biological form will change gradually over time. And then the idea is you should or could find evidence of this in a fossil record. And of course, there's a lot of challenges there. For one thing, you're talking about incredibly long periods of time. And, some little sucker has to get stuck in the mud in the exact right conditions for us to have a fossil. So even with the fossils we have, it's a very small little window into potentially everything that's gone on. But having said that, they were finding, rather than evidence for gradual change, you're finding evidence of punctuated equilibrium, which, it seems like there's a sort of plateau of stability, or maybe some very gradual change. And then there seems to be the evidence that they have access to suggests the period of rapid change. And part of the punctuated equilibrium, and this is by no means a definitive authoritative scientific account, is that perhaps there's isolated populations is one variation on this, and a breeding population of, let's say, the elk or whatever the species is, gets isolated. Usually this is more plastic with the so-called lower species like insects, but a segment of the population might get isolated for extremely periods of long time. Maybe there's an earthquake or a part of the continent splits off, or the UFOs taken to Mars and then bring them back, something. And then when they come back and they have an opportunity to reintroduce with the rest of the population that they weren't isolated from, there's been sufficient change that they're no longer able to interbreed. So now you have a new population. And then if climatic conditions, environmental conditions change sufficiently that suddenly this new species, or this different species, or this whatever you call it, because there's no consistent definition of what a species is, but this new group that can have sex with each other and procreate, and probably not following the four good principles, but they come back and they can interbreed, and if the conditions shift, that suddenly their qualities are favorable for a rapid reproduction, and maybe these new conditions are less favorable for other species, then you'll see evidence in the fossil record of a new form seeming to supplant what appeared to have been the dominant forms that are showing up in this fossil record, which is, quite frankly, as a historian, the record that we have of the past is just a smidgen of everything that went on. So long story short, there was an account of how these sort of steps or dramatic seeming appearances of a change in the fossil record could be accounted for. And in public debate, there was there had been, well, since the 60s, there had been a pretty active creationist reaction, or intelligent design reaction, whatever you want to call it, challenging all this as a somehow alternate version to the Bible, or their understanding of the Bible. So though that crowd really jumped on it. Oh, these guys aren't really sure. There was a big conference early 80s, where they're debating these dynamics, and there's a debate, they're not sure, it's not sure. So there's a little bit of drama surrounding punctuated equilibrium, and how it became a sort of consensus take on Darwinian theory. All right, so there you go. So that was some of the backdrop that was happening at the time. So here we go. This mechanistic and non-mechanistic science, and this chapter is on the Doctrine of Evolution. And here we go. Here's a few editions. Here's the original edition that was printed by Bala Books. That was Yogeshwar's project. That was the same Bala Books that originally published Yamuna's cookbook. Shortly thereafter, the BBT started publishing it, I believe, is the sequence. I don't know the backstory of that, but basically the Bala Books edition and the BBT edition are pretty much the same. Nice drawing there, image. And then there was a Motilal Das Basarnidas. I can't pronounce these words, but they produced an edition in India, naturally, and Sthita-dhi-muni negotiated that. I think it was the early 2000s, perhaps. And then this one on the right is a more recent edition that we put together after Sthita-dhi-muni. I mean, it's the same book inside. We produced a new cover. We had to relay out the text of this book, because the original text was the files. This is early 80s. Actually, I think they did a cut and paste job. This is like early 80s. Fortunately, we found a pretty good digitized copy of it. Hansaduda's people did it. The people who swear that books after 1978 are all bogus. But we found they had a digitized version of this that we were able to capture most of the text pretty readily, and then we had to search and replace and get the diacritics in. So it was a bit of a project. We got it back in print, and you can order it now online at Amazon. And Yamaraj put together a really nice cover there. I like it personally, but we love the old one too. And there you go. A little bit background on the book. All right, so this a lot of the discussion Sthita-dhi-muni brings to this chapter is a precursor to what was published in Forbidden Archaeology about a little over 10 years later. It did bring up the knowledge filter argument, and let me just say something about Forbidden Archaeology, at least how it's been marketed and popularized with knowledge filter arguments and paradigm shift arguments and all this. These things are already very well established academic arguments, though Forbidden Archaeology did help popularize them to perhaps an audience that likes to read that book. Sthita-dhi-muni also raises up some of the problems with, some of the shortcomings of punctuation, some of the critiques you can make of some of the discussions had been going on about punctuation at the time, particularly this highland erosion. And I think I have it a little bit later in the book. You already get a question?
I was wondering if you could go over the knowledge filter argument just quickly.
Yeah, I think I have, see, normally when I'm giving class, I have all my PowerPoint slides on the side, so I know where I am.
Oh, okay.
But I think I bring it up. If I don't, call me up.
Okay.
Yeah, usually I keep my little things on the side. Well, the knowledge filter, okay, I'll say something. Basically, I have a more familiar appreciation from at least from an analysis of Kuhn's on scientific revolutions, which is really beaten to death, and which is really the foundation of a modern history of science approach. Either Kuhn or reaction to Kuhn. But basically, science is done by scientists, and scientists happen to be human beings. And human beings have all kinds of glorious qualities. No matter how much brain power you have, you still have the same freaking DNA. Oh, I just blew it. Same DNA and the same emotional makeup. And people tend to do certain things in certain ways. So there gets to be a sort of standard science, an established body. Our little well, Dr. Frog here is honed in here. He could speak on this. You get in our terms or ISKCON class, Bhaktivedanta class terms, you tend to get in your little well of experience, no matter how many brain cells you have. And then anything that isn't in your comfort zone of experience, oh, it's twice as big, 3 times as big. If it's really bizarre out of the well, it's like, man, that can't be real. That's nutty. But I mean, 3 times, 4 times, I can understand that. The size of the Atlantic Ocean, is it 10 times bigger? A power of 10? Oh, it's like they don't have experience too. So if you have a sort of standard body of evidence that's by a group of scientists, they feel they vetted it, or this same principle applies to any group of human beings. They feel comfortable with it. They're working it. They have their standards. What's would be and then anomalous evidence, because everything doesn't fit. And however intelligent you are, however you conceive of the material energy, everything doesn't fit in it. You got a tiny brain, and your experience is minuscule. If anything, modern science should give you that very clear realization of everything they keep tripping into that they had no idea of prior to now that they know about it. So the knowledge filter then is generally speaking, if it just doesn't fit inside that well, or some concept of how big the well could possibly be, we sort of filter it out, because what are we going to do with it? It's just so mind-blowing. What are we going to do with transvestite unicorns? I mean, it's just like out of our experience. What bathroom will they use? It's just like we don't have it. We now we may have just don't know. So it tends to get filtered out. Kuhn would go on, enough anomalous evidence accumulates, and generally a younger generation of researchers will see, the old paradigm here, the standard, it's like we've kind of done a lot with it. Now we have all these new areas of research. I got 40 years and 50 years in front of me. I got to make a name for myself. I see more potential doing research with some of this anomalous evidence, and I'm starting to get some good results. Whereas if you've already committed 40 years and you get the gravy train flowing, and you're getting be old and sleepy, it's like, look, man, I got together. I have no real incentive to look, to change, you get a new car, if you will. So it's usually a younger generation, and Kuhn himself and others, usually the old guys die off, and that's what happens when you start to get a shift. Because the younger guys is like, you're 40 years in front of me, and this thing's already been beaten to death, and I see some promise here. New research. So you can apply. Anyways, Kuhn brought this to the study of science. He published, 60-something? And then as he was publishing, he found that there was a book that was published in the 30s by a mathematician. Oh, I forget his name. It was just before the war. The guy was still alive, and he gave him credit in the foreword. So it's not, again, these sort of principles. Oh, the other guy was doing sociology of science. Anyway, we're moving on. So this kind of discussion that I just had was not in the popular discourse in the 40s, 50s, 60s. even in the 60s, then it was an academic discourse. You started getting into the 70s and postmodernity and college, courses, then it starts to get more readily discussed. So one thing I will say is the founding generation of Krishna conscious culture on a global scale who are following Prabhupada, I was a baby tail end boomer person of that. Is, you were presented science was like, this is certain knowledge, and we're really going to figure things out. And coming out of World War I and World War II, and now we're going to figure it out. And certainty here. There's a generation of scientists who came of age. Our science will now, bring a new day. And all this other great religion. They were blessing tanks, and not tanks. They didn't have them. Cannon in World War I. They get the priests out to bless the tanks. This stuff, or they go to, the church. The religious discussion at the time was a little bit thin, perhaps, and so there was a whole generation of scientists and people who thought maybe all these new toys were coming out. It was a new world coming out, a new world of science. So there was a bit of a pumped up faith. I remember thinking as a little kid, in science, boy, one day we're going to figure out all these diseases and everything. We'll live forever and won't get old, and then it's going to be perfect. But it doesn't quite happen that way, because the material, as smart as we are, I mean, I'm talking about our present, us, not the rest of those people.
Right.
As smart as we are, material energy is infinitely more complex. I mean, that's our basic, Prabhupada talking point. So anyway, so I think I just saw a poll. Well, it was some popular article. I don't know where. It wasn't Fox News, but it was, maybe it was. But anyway, it referenced the Pew Foundation. It referenced the actual study. And it was by the Pew Foundation, I think, or some very reputable, it was a scientific study about how in America, the land that I love, 29%, only 29% of population have faith in science, after COVID and everything else. It used to be much higher. And then Drew Karma says, well, they seem to have even less faith in religion, though, still. But they don't have that kind of faith anymore. That sort of sentimental faith of the mid-20th century. It's still around. It's still a concern. But times change, or maybe in part because of books like Mechanistic and Non-Mechanistic Science. So anyway, so we're talking about punctuated equilibrium. Highland erosion was another thing. They weren't finding certain bodies of evidence, and this guy Daniel Axelrod was saying, well, maybe it was about flowering plants. They had gymnosperms. Again, I'm a historian of science. I ain't the scientist, but I have a good feel of these topics on a discussional level, this discourse. So like pine trees, they don't have flowers. So it was a dominance of those kind of plants that didn't flower. And then all of a sudden, in evolutionary terms, they boom, 12 million years, they're dominant, flowering plants. You have fruits and watermelons. I got to get some watermelons because they're in season here. Anyways, I didn't have time to get them because they're supposed to be here. So I got to go get them right afterwards. So they're flowering plants. So can't stay serious more than 5 minutes. So very quickly, these more sophisticated plants became dominant, and so there was one. Well, how do you handle that? So one theory was, well, maybe in cooler climes and upland areas, up in the mountains, up in the hills, that's where that isolated population developed. And because it's upland, you get a lot of erosion, and it all gets washed away because it gets washed down the Swanee River. And then when the climate changed, they took over, in a dominant way. So Sthita-dhi-muni, I think I have more of that later. Anomalous evidence that's ignored or suppressed. Again, a sort of knowledge filter type thing. A lot of hand waving, vague or incomplete explanation. Scientists are human beings. They do all the human stuff. I got an explanation. I feel comfortable with. Oh yeah, everybody knows. You don't know. Makes sense. Hopeful monsters. That was another big. That was an earlier analysis. Ooh, what was the guy's name? I have it in the PowerPoint. That somehow maybe some huge mutation event, a dramatic mutation event, suddenly created enough new genetic material to show up in the phenotype as different, a variation of form, and maybe and therefore this group couldn't no longer interbreed. So over the years they become very distinct. All right. Tendency. He also discussed tendency to seek explanation. Look, scientists are just people. And people are crazy, present company excluded. Tendency to see explanations in familiar places, familiar principles. And he discusses the drunk's lost keys syndrome. And so he's pulling this up. Again, these are wildly I mean, I got my degree in the history of science. This is just standard stuff, because we're scientists study, anthropologists study the primitives, so-called, I don't use that word anymore. Less materially complex cultures in the rainforest. Oh, look at that, let's study that. Well, historians and philosophers of science can often tend to study the scientists with the same eye. So, and they're people. Drunk's lost keys syndrome. So it's like, if I'm looking for some evidence, I lost my keys, let me look over there under the street light, because I can see there. I mean, I ain't gonna look in the bushes. It's dark, So you tend to look where you're comfortable, where the evidence seems to be. At any rate, we have I can assure you, to the degree that I have any assurance, we have a very small slice of whatever the heck's going out there. I mean, this is our basic philosophy. We are covered by conditional senses, doesn't see the whole thing. And if anything, science supports that. They keep tripping into broader vistas of topics to research, about which they had no idea about just a generation or so before. Sthita-dhi-muni discusses a negative theological argument. Was it atheist? It's not atheist. It's called there's a word sometimes it's used. Atheology. I think that's not the word I'm looking for. So God is logical, but natural processes, aren't. Well, how do they know they aren't? They're not logical to you. As if you were God, you wouldn't do it that way. Anyways, Gould has a quote. So here's another critique of these guys, like Dawkins. He does some brilliant science, and then he writes popular books, which are, we can't use the word retarded anymore. We used to use it on the playground a lot, so I wouldn't use that. They're very simplistic. They sort of been criticized, like someone who's dropped out of an undergraduate philosophy course. They're very, they're for a popular audience. It's my musings as I'm so brilliant at science. Now I can talk about anything that's way beyond my field. And this was very popular mid-20th century. I mean, it still goes on. It still goes on. Okay, intelligent design critique discusses that. Look, I've had discussions with folks, and we have engaged, things that are reminiscent of intelligent designs within the tradition. You look at the natural world for evidence of God. Why not? It's something that's supportive. We engage the intellectual energy. But the tradition itself, scholars, they haven't found evidence of people going off on tangents like you might see in contemporary times, that because we find evidence of God, this proves it. And that's our proof, rests on because the sun comes up at 7:05 on January 5th, and it works for me. It must be a God. It's a nice feeling. It's a nice sentiment. It might build some faith if you like to wake up at that time, but it's not absolute proof. They would rather go elsewhere when they're doing the main thrust of their arguments. Anyway, so in contemporary times, a reaction to intelligent design and those kinds of arguments, in part, is a reaction to these sort of things being dominant and codified in the early part, particularly 1800s, 19th century, which is a long backstory to it. Anyway, so intelligent design critique. The value of design arguments are directly proportional to the sophistication of one's concept of God. So I just kind of was ranking on or criticizing Professor Dawkins. And there are published books on this. His philosophy, his grasp of the philosophical issues is like somebody who paid someone to take their philosophy class and didn't actually do the work. It's very simplistic. Anyway, so I think I talk more about it. So here's opening quote from page 183. All reputable. Okay, this is a quote. This is from Sir Julian Huxley, who was Aldous Huxley was his brother. We read that in high school. What was that? Brave New World? That was his brother, his sibling. They're British, so they probably said sibling. But they're grandsons, they identified as sons, of Henry Huxley, who was Darwin's bulldog. And Sir Julian was a very dominant evolutionary biologist in the mid-20th century. He was also an incredibly depressed guy. And as we know, historians of science, he was part of my dissertation. But he had a little bit of problems there. And he often fantasized about how we're going to just do amazing grand things with science. And some folks have said, well, maybe that's a symptom of his depression. He's like overcompensating, in places that really don't work. But anyways, he's an interesting, charismatic guy. He established UNICEF. I remember we used to trick or treat for UNICEF. You guys do that stuff? Because you're a lot.
I did it as a
You
kid.
did it?
Yeah, little boxes. Yeah.
Did you grow up in America?
We did.
What part?
New Jersey.
They didn't do it? That was a big thing. The little milk cans,
Yeah.
little milk. That was so cool. You fill it up with change. Anyway, they do nice work, I'm sure. It's sort of a kids' charity or something. UN, they help children with this money, hopefully, or at least people who say that they're helping children. They help them, with probably some nice. Any rate, so Sir Julian, big 20th century evolution, part of this evolutionary synthesis. In 1959, it was the 100th year, the Darwin centenary of the publication of Origins. Yeah, 59 would be the publication of Origins. And so this was just after this evolutionary synthesis. These big scientists had found a synthesis of genetic theory that was developing and Darwinian theory about physical, changes in phenotype over time. And they found those are the two main disciplines, how we could get them to work together, like Reese's peanut butter cups, chocolate, anyways. And then other disciplines too, anthropology. They sort of had they developed a comprehensive framework where they could have a lot of discussion and develop a stable a school of thought on evolutionary theory. And of course, later on, punctuated equilibrium would complicate it. But for our purposes, this is 59. They were feeling full of themselves. They had reached this sort of consensus. They had celebrations all over the world to celebrate this. The biggest one was at the University of Chicago. They had a whole big ceremony in the chapel at the University of Chicago with robes and this and that. And they actually had plays. There was a whole week of Darwinia, and all the scholars. Other places did it as well. Everywhere, but this is the biggest one, and he was a leader of he was the celebrity host, if you will, and he gave a sermon from the chapel of the University of Chicago pulpit there, their cathedral, and this was definitely, and it was just rabid evolutionary humanism. Man's the highest achievement. I got this lecture when I went to prep school by this British lady who was the headmaster at the time. Man, we've struggled so long in the mud with the other amoeba, and now we became this, we became that. Like I don't remember any of this. And then we became, dinosaurs, or whatever the heck was next, and gorillas and Neanderthals, and now we are human beings here at our prep school, and you guys are kicking it. Go get it. That should be your inspiration. Anyway, so it was that kind of sermon, got a big reaction. That's what really instigated the whole creationist response in a public way in America and the West. I mean, they're always around, but they've been kind of dormant since the 1920s with the Scopes trial. They actually, it's a complicated story there. It's not monkey on a stick. Jesus, that's a different topic. But there was the Scopes monkey trial. Oh, it was a Pulitzer Prize winning a book. Totally escapes me, and must be about 20 years old now. But there was a very academic.
Inherit the Wind.
That's the play. That's the play, which was developed, a book and a play, which was developed in the 50s, and that was basically a critique of McCarthyism. It's not an accurate analysis of the Scopes trial at all. It's like a dramatic. It's like it was a way to criticize the McCarthy era communist witch trials without directly attacking it. Same thing with that book about the Salem witch trials. I'm just brain dead. That became a movie with I can't remember it. It's not important. But this newer book, it's a Pulitzer Prize winner, American Experience, or somebody did a documentary on it. But anyway, it was a very complicated thing. It was basically the businessmen had created this to get publicity for that town, Dayton, Ohio. They were the ones behind it. They actually the reality was they recruited scopes to actually push the buttons here because they know there's a lot of energy here. We'll attract, there's a trial waiting to happen. And let's attract it here to Dayton, Tennessee, and promote the town. I swear to God, this is scholarly orthodoxy now. It was a big party. It was a big party. But anyway, and then Scopes was convicted. It was a traffic ticket, the equivalence, and the prosecutor, William Jennings Bryan, paid for it. You know, it was anyway, we're not talking about Scopes. But since then, there was a lot of bad publicity that sort of ridiculed this. It took, like the Inherit the Wind. And the response to evolution was very muted up until around this period. We're now talking about the 50s, and what stirred it back up again was this over-the-top presentation of evolution, which also was making the textbooks at this time, because this is the era of Sputnik. The Soviets put up a satellite in 57-ish. I wasn't there yet, and it really created a lot of, actually, the Americans, I'm a flag waver, I'm warning you, but this is consensus, this isn't on the limb, but they had passed on this first generation of rockets because they knew it was a dead end, and they were on their second generation. Plus, they were having some problems with their rockets. But the Soviets took advantage, clever little buggers they were, and sent up a first generation rocket with a very modest little aluminum ball-ish, well, it was the size of a basketball, I think, satellite, very simple, that did beeping. So everybody had, a lot of people had ham radios back then. You could hear it. Oh my God. And it was just the first satellite, you know, first thing in outer space did, to orbit the Earth as conceived, if conceived as a globe. And you know, you can hear it on your ham radio. If you got the sun reflection just right, you could see it with binoculars. And it was a stunning PR success for the Soviets, created a lot of fear in the American public that we're falling behind in science and mathematics. Meanwhile, the guys in the Pentagon, they were like, well, you know, we kind of got embarrassed here, but you know, this is a PR stunt. So there was no real missile gap per se. And that was played up in the next election, Kennedy versus Nixon. I mean, there was a little bit, but it was not like the fears were there. Anyway, so for our purposes, another outcome of this was we have to redo the textbooks and bring them up to speed. We're falling behind. And so when you're redoing the science textbooks, the biology textbooks, who are you going to get? The big name scientists at the time, most of them were involved in this evolutionary synthesis. So you started to get textbooks in the 60s, this sort of pro-human, it wasn't so much. I got one of these textbooks, early 70s. They're still hanging around. I did accelerate, no, later, mid 70s. Anyways, the whole introduction is this preamble of evolutionary humanism, like that lady, the woman headmaster from British lady, you know, this, and I got kind of inspired by it. I want to take evolutionary advanced biology here in high school, and I'll figure it out too. They got it figured out. And so, you know, it's very soaring and aspiring, and we're going to figure out ways no one else has been able to figure it out. And then I got into the actual text, and it's like, it's just a bunch of dissecting frog stuff, just technical stuff. And then I thought, okay, well, okay, I get it. You know, there's a lot of legwork here. You know, you got to do the, you know, well, you know, the thigh bone's connected to the leg bone. What does that have to do with the meaning of life? You know, oh, look at the tendon. And then I thought, okay, well, human beings, I'm rambling, but human beings are so special, you know, and a thing that makes it, I had to do my paper for this advanced biology, high school biology. So what makes the human being so special? Our hands, you know, we can't type on a computer if you don't have hands. So, you know, how could you be advanced if you can't type on a computer, right? So I'm going to do on the evolution of the hand, because I'm inspired by those old Time Life books of how the horse changes over time and the elephant changes over time. I'm going to do one on the hand. So I'm doing research on this, and there's no fossil evidence. I'm like, oh my God, what am I going to write about? Because the hand bones are extremely, you know, this is the, you know, extremely small. You know, somebody smashes your hand and the bones are gone, you know, and so they didn't have that much evidence. And I'm like, they have a lot of good talk. So I didn't have much to write about, and I got criticized. I was fudging it. I says, well, what am I supposed to do? There ain't nothing here, you know. So, you know, I was like, I had my aunt type this up because we didn't have computers yet, and I can't type, you know, without a computer. And, you know, it wasn't my fault. They hadn't invented them yet. So she typed it up. She was good. And she was saying, this is kind of thin. And what can I do? I couldn't find it. I was fired up to find it. And then my teacher said, I got a C. So that really, how could this be true if I only got a C? But at any rate, getting back to this, there was a lot of wind in the sails. Julian Huxley was leading this sermon. It was in the press. So what did he say? Well, eventually, all reputable evolutionary biologists now agree that the evolution of life is directed by the process of natural selection and by nothing else. No room for Christians here, except as a Tea Party, where we sort of tolerate them as sentimentalists. So that didn't go over well with certain Americans. God bless them. With these words, Sir Julian Huxley summed up the consensus of a learned opinion at the Darwin Centennial celebration of '59. And that was kind of the mood. We really got to figure it out. We're going to figure things out that previous generations just couldn't get it together. And in their defense, as human beings, this is a generation of scientists that went through World War I, grew up. This is their formative years, went through the Great Depression and then World War II. And it's like, this stuff isn't working, and they're investing their faith in science. So they're human beings. They hadn't heard about Krishna consciousness yet. But boy, are we telling them now. But okay, chapter central argument on page 54. We shall argue the theory of evolution as, this is Sthita-dhi-muni speaking. We shall argue the theory of evolution has been motivated more by philosophical misunderstanding than by the strength of empirical evidence. All right, well, again, science, ideology, and worldview is my theme of my dissertation. That's kind of like that. I honed in on this guy, John C. Green, who's an intellectual historian, intellectual Christian. He was at all these Darwin events. He presented papers at the American Philosophical Society version, and a lot of these guys are there too for those celebrations. And he was calling them out on that. There's the science, the empirical evidence, and then there's worldviews. Then suddenly you frame it. This fits with me. I'm comfortable. I'm in it. This is even better than Genesis. I got Darwin. How can there be a God? I don't have to go to the church to worship Jesus. I can go worship Sir Julian Huxley and Darwin. Anyways, and then there's ideology, where you take these things, turn them into talking points and sound bites, and go to it. We're going to create a brave new world, as Sir Julian Huxley's brother wrote about, with Darwin as our. Well, no, in his brother's book, Brave New World, it was Henry Ford was the deity. So they didn't do Darwin; they did Henry Ford as the industrialist. All right, so there's a lot of philosophy. Here's the problem. Darwinian theory, in my view, anything's possible. Krishna is unlimited. Maybe on one level of perception, it's we have no essential relationship with these forms. And somewhere in this Puranic concept of the universe, there's human-ish forms that facilitate the expression of human consciousness. And who knows? On one lens, you put on dark sunglasses, everything looks one way. You put on infrared sunglasses, suddenly you see stuff you don't normally see. Who knows what's going on out there? Maybe from one lens, it appears like this. I mean, that's our conditional experience. From another lens, it appears like that. So who knows what's going on? Maybe multiple things are going on. But to say that evolution explains it all is, maybe it's interesting on certain levels. But anyways, there's a lot of philosophical naivete, particularly in works like of Dawkins' quality. And this kind of scientism, a faith in evolutionary humanism as supported by a concept of science, is philosophically naive to consider. We got to figure it out. End of discussion. Talk about ideologue. All right, so evolution is a visible process. This is Sthita-dhi-muni. So he's critiquing presentations of the theory of evolution. It's not an absolute theory. You don't have to give, even if you would think there's something going on there, you don't have to give up, If God's infinite, he can do anything he wants and spin your head around as much as he likes. God has a sense of humor. So Sthita-dhi-muni, anything's possible. So, and maybe it's all hogwash. That's another possibility. So evolution of Sthita-dhi-muni is saying fossils yielded practically no evidence of gradual change from one species to another. Touched upon that. And then Gould and Eldridge had been working on punctuated equilibrium, this theory that we talked about, that can explain apparent rapid change in the fossil record. And here's a couple of quotes. I guess this is also Sthita-dhi-muni. Yep. Evolutionary changes take place in short bursts, but separated by long periods of time. Mentioned that. And otherwise, the appearance in the paleontological records appears comparatively stable. And then the explanation is when a small group is isolated from the main population, passed by a geographical barrier, or maybe the aliens built a bridge and now they can't cross the highway. Or anyway, so that, and then when they re-enter, maybe this isolated population suddenly is favored by climatic conditions, and then once they get the favorable conditions, then they do a lot of breeding, successful breeding, and then they become a prominent part of the fossil record. It appears quick, but they were hanging around there. Fossil record of origin of high plant. Daniel Axelrod's Highland erosion. So he's doing a critique, and he's responding to the discourse at that time. So in part, we have to go back to 1980. But again, I think the main takeaway here, these things are still discussed, but I mean, they've been talking about it for 40 years since. But I think one of the beauties of Sthita-Bhutta's presentation is the quality of his arguments within the context that he's making these arguments. I mean, you do have to take that into account. But the quality and how he marshals his evidence, and I think that is the big takeaway here. The quality that he brings to these arguments, and the qualifying language he uses. He doesn't come off like an ideologue. He's handling it with a mature scholarship while being exceedingly faithful, in my estimation, to Prabhupada's presentation of the Gaudiya Vaishnava Siddhanta. All right, so here Sthita-Bhutta is critiquing Daniel Axelrod's Highland erosion hypothesis. I mean, it could well be going on, but does this explain everything absolutely? Well, no. So, or maybe it does. How would you know? You're going to test it? You're going to go back in time and test all the uplands and lowlands and see where the little the tree shrews were living, and or the grapefruits were living. And then go back to the future. Well, how come we don't find evidence here? How are you going to test it? But it's a theory. It provides some exploratory power. But he's just arguing. So some of these species, this isolated populations perhaps were in these highland areas. Erosion washed them away. Later on, the conditions changed, and they were around. They were floating around, but they appeared to explode because suddenly it's like they won the climatic lottery. And man, now we got money. We're going to town. Let's breed. Okay, now just to say, like with hand waving, well, that explains it. Nothing to see here anymore. We're good. Evolution is true. That is hand waving. And whereas maybe that would pass muster 50s, 40s when they were developing the evolutionary synthesis, that as now we start to see the limitations of our conditional project. Our aspirational project here, it's with punctuated, it's starting to, it doesn't fly quite as easily. Too many critics. Scientists tend to get a little bit cloistered in their research project. They're not known for being philosophers. Some of them are philosophers. Your rank and file scientist is like, dang, I got a research project here. I'm getting funding. It interests me. I got a bunch of CUBE graduate students helping me out here, depending on their gender identity might be. And we're good to go. Pays the bills. There are people. Best as I can tell. I have studied them a bit. The enigma of biological form. So so this came out before Origins magazine. Rameshwar Prabhu was a big driver of that. Judah Karma was on board, a few others. They did a popular BTG type, something they could distribute on out there, like they were distributing BTGs at the time. So this is there was some discussion here of this flatworm. It has the nematocyst. I can't pronounce Latin or English for that matter. Anyways, it's a complicated this aspect of this flatworm. It's a very sophisticated. I couldn't tell you what it is exactly. I'm thinking of the flagella, but that's not what this is. It's some complicated organ in this very simple organism, and to account for it by theorizing small steps of the way could bring you to this comparatively sophisticated organic machinery. We call biological form yantras, machines, I think is one way to define that Sanskrit term. This biological machinery, very sophisticated, even in a simpler comparatively form, to say little steps, because each little step has to have some advantage. Otherwise, why would they keep it around? And then it all comes together. So it's difficult to account for these statocyte in certain species of shrimp. I remember that one. I think it's a little pebble in little aspect of a little, sack and, with some fluid in it. And, if you turn, the pebble's always pointed down because of gravity. Of course, nobody knows what gravity is, but it does that. Always points to the center. So the shrimp would then, with this organ, have a sense of up and down because, you can lose track. You're down in the ocean there. I'm up, I'm down. Where's the killer whale, man? Look out. So this helps them figure out how not to get eaten, I guess. Or otherwise, it impresses the female shrimp, assuming they don't have it, or the other male shrimp, and it helps for sexual selection. But I think this is just for survival of the fittest type thing. Bacterium E. coli, the flagella. Here's the flagella. We presently have no idea. People have theorized more and more and more, blah, blah, blah. This has been a challenge to their face. But Sthita-dhi-muni was one of the first people I know of. I'm sure it was out there. He didn't, he read it someplace, but to popularize it. Anyway, so there's a little hair-like device on the back of the little amoeba thing. And that's how that's its wheels, man. When it wants to go out on the weekend, man, it flaps that tail and it drives off the drive-in to hang out with his buddies or whatever amoeba might do with their time. But this thing, it propels him around. And to say, and then this little, so like a little motor, and it waves the rudder thing, and off he or she goes, or it. It's an amoeba. They just split, right? What bathroom would they use? I don't know. It's so confusing. So unless the whole thing works, it's useless. So, again, how do you explain all the different parts, having some selective, a favorable, an advantage for the species or whatever it is for reproducing? Why would it be kept on? And then what to speak, it all comes together. And then it's like, what good is half a car? Looks cool, but it don't go anywhere. So why, unless you have the full car, it ain't moving. And what's the use of it's going to just sit there and rust. Sea slugs had something else. So he's bringing up all these examples that made one pause as far as more simplistic explanations of how evolutionary could happen. So it complicates that. So again, it doesn't prove it didn't happen, but it proves you got to come up with something better. We ain't just buying it because you said so. And these things have now been discussed for 40 years. There's arguments, there's counter arguments. In one sense, it's how to analyze the data, and they're getting more data all the time. Is in part of exercise in punditry. There's always another argument. All right, move. Oh, here you go. Resurrection of the Hopeless. So Sthita-dhi-muni, it's a nice little chapter to go through issues that were current at the time and still are discussed. And I think as a historian, what's really interesting is how he handled them. With his arguments and his evidence, the discipline he brought to the discussion. It's not just, well, you guys don't smoke the same cigarettes as me, so how can you be a man? That was a famous argument too, right? Doesn't smoke. Anyway, it's like, I don't like something about you and your theory. It can't possibly be right. All right, so that convinces some people, and others, it's like, what? These guys are idiots. So, really, a nice response helps develop faith in your audience. That's good. I mean, I'm not much of a preacher, but or at all. But I mean, if you're trying to convince somebody about something, you want to present some presentation that facilitates that person's forward progress. And we're dealing with all kinds of individuals, and some like a real, Trumpian sort of argument, and others may look for a different kind of argument for how best to handle the situation. And thus we have such a dynamic political system here in North America. Any rate, so this he's dealing with the resurrection of the hopeful mouse. So Richard Goldsmith, that's the man's name, came up with this: how a single mutation can produce in one stroke an elaborate systematic change of biological structure and function. So that was the initial take on it, and then it was like, but then that's complicated. How could you have this mutation? It has to provide some favorable advantage. It has to be able to pass on, and it was complicated. Plus, we now see, excuse me, usually qualities is this suites of genotype, genetic material that's involved. and anyways, it's too complicated and problematic. Okay, the probability goes down exponentially with the number of variables, and the same can be said in general about multi-featured biological mutations. Yeah, so anyways, it was kind of poo-pooed to the side, but then more complexity comes up, and we're going to revisit it. Maybe on these conditions, something like this can happen. But anyways, it could be a useful analysis, but is it a clean-cut explanation? None of these things are, and that was a pretty dramatic one that was didn't carry the day. But sometimes variations of a percent. I mean, there could be something like that could happen in certain contexts, but does this, like, because I found a big pen next to the pyramids. Oh, gee whiz, all the pharaohs used to use big pens back in the day. I found it there in Egypt next to the pyramid. It could be an explanation. It may not be the best explanation, or it may not, or maybe they did have them. They had time machines, but maybe it doesn't explain everything. Who knows? Anyways, it's an explanation. It complicates these explanations, offers some context and background. These are a part of the discussion. Other arguments that relate to considering origins. The horse's hoof. Many complex, again, similar arguments, very complex interrelated features that can hardly be accounted for by random mutations in either structural or regulatory genes. It's difficult. I think someone could make an argument. We could. But it's like, is it absolutely certain that's what happened? And there's a lot of complexity here that suggests, yeah, anything can happen, but is that the only possibility here? Someone who's a believer in the congregation, yeah, hallelujah, I like that one. It must be right. So scientists are human beings sometimes, and they have those proclivities too, not just street preachers, alcoholic street preachers, who are very convinced. Sometimes scientists can be alcoholics too, and street preachers, for all practical purposes. Baleen whales, there's something going on there about their teeth here. Don't ask me what that word means, because I looked it up once, can't remember it. Something supposedly in the Bemberg whale. Oh, I think I know what this is about. I think sometimes in embryos, what was that called? Forget the name, it's a whole term for it. Recapitulation. So sometimes, you see in embryos, it's sort of like a recapitulation of the evolutionary process. You see something that reminiscent of so-called simpler forms, and in the embryonic development, and it's a recapitulation of it, and then you get to the. So sometimes you see things, but I guess in this term, I have to remember to look up atavistic.
Yeah, atavistic basically means like a throwback, something that.
Yeah. Okay, so it's recapitulation. Yeah. So why would an intelligent designer do it that way, especially if he's creating everything all at once? Boom, Well, there's many ways to handle that. So they had different, arguments and origins here. Why reinvent the wheel? Could be another. But if somebody is anyway, there's a lot of simplistic philosophical arguments. Creator can do anything he wants. I remember somebody was saying, if there's a God, how come the Earth is in a perfect circle globe? Obviously somebody screwed up. It's a little bit bulging at the what? Who says if you were God, maybe you'd create perfect circles like the ancient Greeks, but how do you know what God likes to do? I mean, maybe, he's got his reasons. Who the hell are you? Anyway, I hope I said that. Chapter conclusion. Oh, it's almost over. So, Sthita-dhi-muni, our aim is to show that the evidence commonly cited as proof, and a lot of these guys in the public presentations, is incontrovertible proof. Is that how you say it?
Incontrovertible.
Incontrovertible, that word too, probably a better one. That's a good word, right? That's not a bad word.
Yeah, it's a good word.
Okay, uncontrovertible proof. So they're often presented like that. Ain't no argument here. We got it figured out. Let's sing hallelujah. The chorus begins to sing now. Of the theory of evolution can also be explained, or at least complicated, just as convincingly in non-evolutionary terms, or in other evolutionary terms. In so many ways, in unlimited ways, in due course of time. What there is there's a community of scientists that are working on this problem, and this particular popularized present, and often by the time they're popularized, the scientists have already moved past it. By the time you see it even in a college textbook, they're already moved past it. But there's all kinds of debates within scientific communities. There may be a dominant consensus or or this explanation is a dominant part of the gene pool, and it gets expressed in the phenotype, and the other things are mutations and secondary qualities. But there's debates. Nothing is certain. Nothing is real. Our theme has been that such information, you know, and particularly this founding generation, that time, this sort of pablum stuff in textbook science was passed off as very real, you know, and boy, oh boy, then this generation starts hearing stuff like fifth canon. Was like, holy cow. A lot of these guys say, Prabhupada, the scientists say, it's oftentimes, Prabhupada, this is what I was trained. I don't know how to make sense of it. This is the scientist in my head saying it. You know, I can't get him out of my head. Can't get him out of my head. So scientists say many things, and scientists are saying that, and we're saying that. But who cares? I mean, they're interesting people too. Let's study them, just like they study us. And that's what historians and philosophers of science do. So, anyways, can be explained by just as conventionally in non-evolutionary terms. Our theme has been that such information can only be direct, you know, by transcendental processes to take advantage of the higher sensory and cognitive capacity of the conscious self. All right. So you're trying to get more metaphysical, you know. I'll say you can't even do it that way. I will complicate Sthita-dhi-muni's argument, because in the first verse, where Sukadeva Goswami begins to explain fifth canon cosmology, he plainly says, even Lord Brahma doesn't have all the evidence yet. Even he can't speak on this perfectly if you have a lifetime as great as Lord Brahma. And we also say, Krishna's, it's not some static Greek thing. Oh, I got it all figured out, now let's just buzz. You know, Krishna's dynamic. His capacity to create is an eternal competition with his capacity to know, to understand himself. Constantly competing. It's dynamic. It's not like my little brain's now got it figured out. Now let's retire and collect Social Security. It's done. At any rate, it's dynamic. But some of these questions being asked by scientists, you're not going to be able to access. I think this is what Sthita-dhi-muni is saying here. You're not going to be able to access at least a fuller answer just on the level of data that is accessible to a scientific explanation, certainly in your time or in present times, because future people are going to be looking back at us. Oh, those poor naive scientists only had so much information. They did a good job, the best that they could do. But we know so much more now. Look what we can do. You know, and so future generations of undergraduates are going to be laughing at modern science, just like we look at, other views, even within professional science from 50, 100 years ago. Let me put it this way. It just popped in my head, so I got to run with it. The difference of understanding within modern professional science that's arisen, the disciplines, the modern late 19th century, 1800s, the difference in their concept of the universe between what's going on now in astrophysics and what was understood in 1870, 1890, 1900, up to 1920, even when they, it's so different. It's been argued it's a greater difference between a modern scientific understanding of the cosmos and a modern scientific understanding of the cosmos from the 1900s than the difference between a Newtonian view of the universe, which was, they're starting to think about unlimited space as credible, but, with a sun-centric, heliocentric model, as compared to the Greeks, which is what the Catholic Church had adopted. It's a starker, it's been argued, it's a starker difference within modern science, the shifting views of the cosmos, than between the shift from Greek science and a geocentric Greek, within a Western context here, geocentric Greek science, Aristotelian physics, Ptolemaic models of motion, mathematical models, and the Copernican, Galileo, Kepler, Newton model based on what now is called classical physics. So even material energy is a tricky thing, and anybody who says they just about got it figured out, I'd start heading the other way, because they're ready to hit a brick wall. And this has also happened in modern science. I probably should wrap it up, but I'm going to keep pushing it. Got a captive audience here. In the late 19th century, 1800s, they're pushing Newtonian classical physics. Just got a few small problems here. Black body radiation, can't get the numbers to add up. Something that's black absorbs heat, and then after it absorbs it, it should radiate it. It should, it's hot enough. And we're getting different numbers. Not all the heat's being radiated, or it should match. There's a little problem. So it's just a, in the to the 150,000th degree, whatever it was. But it's a significant problem. But and then scientists, we just got about figured out. Once we get the math to work, we're there. We're going to figure it all out. I mean, that was just one. There was a few things going on like that. And then Max Planck, right? He starts getting into the quantum theorizing and a different way to look at matter, and the define the small, and when you're starting to look at with this whole new realm of physics, which was in science fiction, the numbers start to add up now, and suddenly you just trip into this whole new world of physics of the very small and different structures and I can't even get my head to start talking about quantum theory. I have to go back and read the Wikipedia article to refresh myself. But it is a whole new world of physics that was inconceivable with just these little small problems. So we have a lot of little small problems in modern science. And here's another thing: we have a lot of little small problems, perhaps, or challenge areas of growth in Krishna consciousness. Who know? We've also experienced that ourselves in our development. Things that I was thinking with near absolute certainty as a bhakta. Now I look as kind of, I was at that point one time and, going to talk to the bhaktas, but I outgrew it, I mean, it's not that it's not valid, but we're all, there's a lot of, Krishna is a pretty sophisticated personality. And a little room for humility is never a bad thing. And obviously we have a theistic appreciation. We're interested in bhakti as our central concern, that relationship with this person named Krishna. But if and all this other stuff, we want to engage it, intellectual energy, that energy, this energy, in a way that helps foster the development of our devotional life and those of others. And if somebody's damn convinced about Darwin, sure, whatever, sure. Hey, try this Pakori here, whatever gets them chanting. I'm for that. But to think that a modern science or modern evolution, which is often used in support of an atheistic worldview, that is true. Alternate explanation. This proves the Bible. Just like Rani Kushri, stops all the sacrifices. Now there's no God. So if I have an alternate theory that disproves the Bible, there's no God. Nothing new under the sun here. Anyway, so we want to create a favorable environment for bhakti. And if criticizing Darwin does it, let's criticize him. And if saying some accommodating things about him helps foster faith, Prabhupada did both. I will wrap it up with this. I swear to God. There was Prabhupada was talking to this woman, anthropology student in Australia. So it was when Prabhupada was in Australia. She was doing actually sociology of science, sociology of religion type thing. And Prabhupada, and she's talking about, Hinduism and religion and God. And Prabhupada's trying to have a conversation with her. And she's hung up with a sort of Darwinian interpretation of human culture. And over time it develops. And she was stuck there. And Prabhupada just started hammering Darwin. Every damn thing you could think of to undercut this faith in Darwin as a roadblock to moving the conversation forward. And he's saying every damn nasty thing. I'm dramatizing. You think about Darwin. And so she finally gets, he's relative, he's this, he's just a person, whatever, he has bad breath, his mother's, anything to get her out of that box. And as soon as she sort of said, Darwin's just a person, he's a theorizer, I don't have to just look through that box. Prabhupada dropped it because now she's ready to talk about other things. And this is where Prabhupada wanted to go. So he used criticism of Darwinian and science, whatever, to get this person or these people or these Martians, whoever he happens to be talking to, out of a box that's holding him back. And he's not obsessed. He's using it as a tactical thing. Because as soon as she got that point, no more talk about Darwin. Now let's talk about, what we really want to talk about. If Darwin's preventing forward progress, if Darwin is helping you, we'll engage him. There was one. I lied. There's one more thing. In the morning walks that became a basis for the book Life Comes from Life. Life Comes from Life is the book published. It's like a Broadway production show, dramatization, soap opera version of the actual conversations, which are readily available, both the recordings that we do have and the transcripts. And I think it's the second chapter, and they didn't include this, even a dramatization version of it in that second chapter. It was cut up, but you can get it. There's no conspiracy here. It's all over the place. But there was a silence here, Prabhupada, in the recording, it's Prabhupada's cane is tapping. And then he says, I'm paraphrasing it. You got to study. These scientists, they say there is no God, and they're puffed up, whatever, and we'll smash them for that, But as soon as they say there's a God, we support it. We encourage them. It's all good. I mean, I had a paper on this. I mean, that was his thing. If this science stuff is blocking and interfering with the forward progress, we got to do something about that. If somebody's sentiment to science can be engaged, we got to do something about that too. So we can engage everything. But evolution has been, and science has been, used by atheists as a so-called proof of an atheistic religious philosophy, and that's a problem. As far as what they actually seem to be seeing out there, it's like, oh, isn't that nice? Oh, that's interesting. Sure, dude. Hey, try it before, man. Whatever. All right, I think I'm gassed. That's it. I think that's it. Yep, that was the last one.
Thank you.
No, there's more, but I think I'm done, man. No, I think that was it.
Well, we'll open it up to questions and comments. You can unmute yourself or raise a hand or put it in the chat. And while we're waiting for that, I just have a quick question. Well, first, thank you very much.
No problem. But there is something like prasadam after this, right?
There's something.
Okay, I'm good.
So based on the history of science, you mentioned something about future generations and how, because of things progressing and in our understanding, are we going to be able to get more accurate information, say, on evolution, being that we're getting further away from the events that we're using as evidence?
Well, I will. I don't know about you. No.
You should stop sharing your screen.
Oh, okay. We can get rid of that. Yeah, you can do that.
You have to do it because you're
You
I can do it.
Oh, there's a button here for that, I'm sure. You got it.
Mhm.
Well, historians and philosophers of science, they don't use the word progress, especially in evolution. Progress towards what? How would you even know?
Will we get more accurate?
How would you know it's more
information?
accurate? All you know is these are what you don't. I mean, it just seems we have a certain body of evidence here that we've sort of vetted. This seems like credible evidence we can handle. I mean, there was certain disciplinary standards it appears to meet, and we'll accept that as evidence that we will now study. And then we have a hypothesis that appears to provide the best explanation for it. So, it's all contingent, this hypothesis or this explanation also provides opportunities for more experimentation and research. There's no point in having a dead-end hypothesis. I can't do anything with that. Ain't no career here. I ain't going to get a grant here, man. I got to have something to work on here. Got to pay the bills. My wife's going to throw me out of the house, or my husband, or whatever I got going on. My goldfish ain't going to put up with that. Got to pay the bills. Got to keep the anyway. Let's move on.
Okay.
The aquarium heater and the bubble are working.
Okay, we have
I'm not done. Hold on. So, in one sense, progress towards what? You may have you may have more evidence that provides more insight and research opportunities, and you may have an explanation, a hypothesis that seems to provide a more powerful explanation. But who knows where the goal line is? Who knows? It could be over there, could be anywhere. And who knows if you can even have a goal line? I guess from a philosophical perspective, it's infinite, expanding, unlimited. There's an undercut psychology in conditional people. And scientists are perhaps, for the most part, conditional, jivas. I'm going to figure this out, and maybe I'm going to be pious and worship God on Sunday, but man, in the meantime, I'm going to get it figured out. I mean, even folks like Kepler, who was, I want to understand, these guys are all theists. I want to understand the mind of God through math, my mathematical, without pure bhakti, it's in one sense a waste of time. Now we kick out all cheating religions. It's not like we just kick out that church over there, which wakes us up too early on Sunday. But all forms of approaching God that are incomplete and cheat us of our full relationship with Krishna. We're cheating ourselves. So we're going straight towards it. So they may find more sophisticated, more interesting analysis, but getting closer to what exactly? Maybe one day they'll find a more accurate understanding of something completely different. They haven't even imagined yet. Who imagined quantum theory?
Okay, we have a hand up. Chandrasekhar Swami, Hare Krishna Maharaj. Go ahead.
Hare Krishna.
Harbo?
I just had a simple question, at least to start off with here. As far as we know, there's nobody doing any credible study in the theory of evolution, right? I mean, there's no research groups or anybody doing that. This is a question for anybody.
Where, in the BI or in
Anywhere. I'm talking about
well, credible by whose standards?
by anybody's standards. I don't think
Well, the scientists feel, the evolutionary biologists feel that they're doing, they have their standards and they're finding their information and this and that. And they feel that this is serious research, and this explanation provides a framework for us appreciating cause and effect with concern to evidence they seem to be finding of change in biological form over time.
What does it look like? What's an evolutionary scientist actually do?
Well, you can argue it's a bit of a soft science. It's not like physics.
Yeah.
Yeah, because in one sense, it's a historical analysis of past evidence that apparently comes from the past. It's not, chemistry is physics are considered hard scientists where you can do more direct cause and effect. So there's a lot of theorizing in it. There's a bit of a historical reconstruction here. We're looking at this evidence and we're trying to find a hypothesis that fits. And we're trying to do it in naturalistic terms. We can't say the leprechauns did it. Well, show me a leprechaun doing it. Well, I don't know about that. So they are trying to explain this apparent evidence of change in biological form over time, and this theorizing that they have, and they have some evidence, they have some serious evidence, and they put it together, and a blind uncle is better than no uncle. Because what's the alternate scientific theory? So it's the best theory that they got. But it's all tentative. Of course, scientists as human beings are humans and they invest in their research. But science is an abstract thing, and they will admit this in sober moments. Anything it has to be possible, as Pancharananda likes to say. And we could find a better evidence, or the whole thing could get thrown out. Dawkins actually says that in one of his books. But then he tells you, but quite frankly, as a serious person who knows everything from Britain, I don't see it happening. So we can drop that and now move on. But they will move it. They will admit it as an abstract intellectual principle. Even Dawkins will. Sort of like the cigarette packages, they will admit this thing will kill you. But in the meantime, let's get another pack of cigarettes. So again, it's like, if you're in a framework, a conditional framework, like Simon and Garfunkel says, a man sees what they want to see, or a woman, or maybe just the men, sees what they want to see, and they disregard the rest. And that's actually kind of a reflection of the conditional framework. The intelligence gives us we have certain sets of desires, a worldview, carries us to our next life, our next form. But the demigod, and we want to pursue this, and the demigods give us the intelligence, right? It's just, right, makes sense. I'm going to do it. So it's not just the evolutionary theorists who get themselves in a spot, but they do have certain criteria and a discipline that they apply. Every conditioned soul gets them in the spot. This makes sense. Who needs to go back to Godhead? Who needs to be a pure devotee? I like being a pig. Wasn't that Indra's problem? Yeah, I'm good. I don't know about the theory of evolution, but I'm good here with my girlfriend pigs. You can get lost. Who are you? I'm down. So every conditioned soul, gets themselves in a little box. So I guess my thing is, if you're going to hammer Darwin, which is fine, you should do it in a way that actually helps the recipient of your knowledge, your wisdom, move forward in Krishna consciousness. And in that example, when Prabhupada was talking to the anthropology student, he got her out of the box and she accepted it. And as soon as he got her out of the box, he moved on to something more profound than just, picking on those poor scientists who would sure go home at night and wonder what it's about and why is it only 29% of the Americans believe in them anymore? They don't love us like they used to. How is that going to affect our next round of funding? Oh my God. So, we can hammer them, we cannot hammer them. Is it a comprehensive theory of anything? No. Is it an interesting way to look at things? Perhaps. Does it provide some insight into certain things? Can we engage that? Maybe. I don't know what's going on. I don't know who's right, as long as I'm right. So I think everybody kind of thinks that, unless they're, really making some serious progress in realizing the actual self and its relationship to Krishna.
Okay, thank you very much.
I would say they are doing serious research according to their own criteria. They're a group of people, they have certain disciplinary standards. They're doing some serious research. Have they figured out anything with certainty? No, it's not possible in conditional consciousness.
Well, what would that research even look like? I mean, I wouldn't go in there and expect to see a laboratory, right? They don't have time machines.
Well,
they're just doing historical research through books and seeing what what happened in the past and trying to recapitulate it.
Kind of, they look at present examples of environmental pressures and how genes seem to flow in populations they can study, and then use as an example, and then use that example to do use that evidence to sort of provide a hypothesis how things could have changed in the past. And maybe they do find some evidence of this or that, and but I mean, in one sense, it's a historical analysis. It's a historical analysis when you actually go back in deep time. We have this evidence, that evidence, this fossil record, this evidence of geological shifting. They find some interesting things. For instance, they find certain fossilized evidence of a certain lizard, whatever it is, that ain't around anymore. And it's very distinct. And it's on it. They find some fossilized records of a dinosaur, whatever the thing is, a Martian, whatever. Yeah, and then their analysis of the geological is this would be 500, bazillion years old. This is when this geological formation happened, and then they find it, on the west coast of Africa, and then on the east coast of South America, and coincidentally, the coastline hides a weird fit. And then that's a certain amount of evidence to continental drift. Though though in continental drift they also I mean, we're looking at the past based on evidence we have now. And here's an example of a paradigm. So they do some research. They do mathematical analysis of genes. They can take stuff that they are doing now and then do a study of evidence from the past, and then they provide a hypothesis to explain it. And this is the best that they have, that they feel comfortable working with, short of saying, a leprechaun threw some pixie dust at it and boom. And actually, when they argue against theism, they generally tend to think of a 6,000-year interpretation of the Bible, which isn't even necessarily Orthodox Christianity. So then that's the real complaint. When somebody uses scientific evidence to argue against the theistic argument, it's a very straw man argument. The believers, they sometimes call them believers, the believers, but they're like the others, the believers. We believe in non-belief. That's a belief too, but they think this and that, but we just provided a really cool argument that how silly are they? So therefore we must be right. So people who argue in the name of science do that, and then sometimes people argue in the name of anything do that. You create, a straw man, give the dog a bad name and then hang it, and we just marginalize that, and we're going to rock and roll what we got now. So there's a lot of psychology involved when you get into these arguments. What does the evidence actually suggest as far as a comprehensive metaphysics? This is out of a scientist's wheelhouse. Dawkins sounds like a fool when he tries that. He's someone who's actually trained with some discipline in these things, or otherwise just doesn't agree with them. How to get conclusive metaphysics from empirical evidence is impossible.
Right.
Yeah, it's just impossible.
Yes, Christina, go ahead.
Thank you very much for this.
Well, all I can say is the persona better be pretty good.
No pressure. Well, I feel like your nectarian words are also persona for our ears, Prue.
That is quite a hypothesis, isn't
Yeah.
it?
Yep, quite a hypothesis.
Try proving that, man.
So one of the most interesting, maybe the most interesting sentence that I found in this chapter, I just want to get your opinion of this. So he's talking about evolutionists argue that a sensible God would never produce such aberrations. He's talking about, the whale teeth and stuff like that. And then Sthita-dhi-muni writes, the key to this interpretation is the realization that God does not necessarily intend the material world as an exhibition of his finest workmanship. And I think that's really interesting.
That's an interesting argument. That's a
Yeah.
very simple argument.
What do you think about that?
That's a useful argument. One thing I will say to complicate that is Chris, when we grew up, yeah, they all believe like it's a belief. They all think different things. A lot of these scientists are Christians. Yeah, and now Hindus and whatever, they're not all atheists. But anyways, not all evolutionists believe anything. They're not, Dawkins doesn't represent every evolutionist or any scientist, anything. In fact, there's a lot of blowback. This guy shoots his mouth off like this, like an ideologue, and it actually stirs up this opposition to science. He's not the solution, he's the problem. So there are these discussions, in higher circles. And also lower circles and medium circles now. All types of circles sometimes. Anyway, so that's a very easy philosophical argument you can make against an atheistic interpretation of the natural world. In one sense, this is natural philosophy. And this is people who are doing what we call science prior to the late 1800s, when you had formal disciplines you had to get a degree for, and you had to get that grant and pay the bills. And they people were willing to pay for that knowledge. One of the initial things that gave rise to a modern form of science is industrialization. They in the textile business, which is the first thing that really industrialized, is now you're producing like 5 miles of cotton cloth, and we're going to dye it. We want a kick-ass dye that's going to hold and dye it and not fade. If we're investing all this money in this machinery and the cloth and whereas before, if I just get some blueberries and dye my clothes, I'm making 2 sets of shirts for the family. Ain't such a big deal. But they needed chemists. They needed people who had a mastery of chemistry that could produce and deal with the chemicals, or whatever they called them back then. They weren't conceiving of chemicals the same way we do now, and produce a product. We will pay big money for that. There's a career here if you can produce a good pink, whatever the color was that they wanted. In the Victorian period, you see those old movies. Most everybody's wearing black. Why? Because black is cool. But besides that, that was the only dye that really held up easily. It was easy and cheap to produce. So if you're going to mass produce clothes, black was a go-to. Or Ford, when he was producing Model Ts, you can have any color you want as long as it's black. Black was a real solid color if you're in mass production. You can make others, but it wasn't like today. So they were called natural philosophers previous, or they called themselves natural. They didn't call themselves scientists. That's a word created by the British. No, by the scientific, what we call is, what are we going to call ourselves? We're doing something different now. There's a career here. We're going to call ourselves scientists. Science means knowledge. But they would call themselves natural philosophers. Newton, all these guys. They weren't doing what we call science. Galileo was kind of doing something more akin to what we call modern science, in the sense he was going out and getting patronage for specific research. And then he named like the moons of Jupiter after his patrons, the powerful Italian family, I forgot their name. So he'd be sort of doing the modern science thing where we're getting patronage and getting supported. Thank you. You should be a historian of science. Oh, there's another thing. And then so now they had telescopes and they could see these little moons around Jupiter, and they started mapping out, the charts of how they moved. And then were able to use that as a clock, because the moon moves this, they had 3 little things, they're like little dials in a clock. And because now sailors could start looking. This is funny stuff. Interesting. Sailors can now get their telescopes, the navigator, and see what time it was, the passage of time according to the motion of these little planets that they couldn't even see before. And then so when they're open ocean, you can't really have a clock because they didn't have cell phones and they didn't have Timex don't even have Timexes anymore. I don't think they do have Timex. West clocks. Yeah, they didn't have, they just had pendulum clocks, and they don't work on the open ocean. The thing's wagging all over the place. So they'd have to. But you can go look at the moon and get accurate sense of time. And you need to know how much time has passed to calculate latitude. Yeah, because longitude you could calculate the position of the planets, the curvature. But if you're just going on a one longitude, then the curvature is at any rate has nothing to do with anything we're talking about evolution, but they do find interesting things. Anyway, Galileo, he was humping is not a good word. He was stumping for patronage, and this is something a very highly successful modern scientist has to do. This is reminiscent of the culture of modern science. You got to get patrons to fund your research in your lab and this and that. So he was kind of doing that. Kepler less so. He just got he was a Protestant, and he got the Catholic emperor of the Holy Roman Empire to fund him. And what was he funding him for? Partly because they were funding that other guy, Tycho Brahe, and Tycho Brahe knew Kepler was a damn good mathematician. But also the emperor they're all into prognostication. And you know what that is?
So trying to tell the future.
Yeah, astrology.
Yeah.
And Kepler came up with some good. They were all into astrology. It was serious. It was a science. Kepler actually did a book on what's good astrology, this kind of stuff, Gene Dixon stuff that probably nobody knows about anymore, and what is more accurate, like a Vedic astronomy. He came up with some stunning prognostication. So that's what really paid his bills, was his ability to do astronomical readings. But he was a brilliant mathematician, and Tycho Brahe wanted him, and it was a prestige for the emperor to have these people in his court. They were upgrading charts and this and that.
Here's the question.
Okay. Anyways, I'm just rambling.
Okay, so we have a question by Ashish. This is a good one, and then we'll close out for that time.
That is a good question to ask a Kundides forum. Is it possible to scientifically explain the meaning of higher sensory and cognitive capacity of the conscious self? I think you can talk about that in the abstract, and you can find evidence for it. Perhaps we're identifying this and that as whatever these terms are, and this evidence seems to suggest how this might work. But are you going to deal with it like a mathematical equation, or like a chemistry experiment? We just put the we just put the Mentos into the bottle with the Coca-Cola, and boom, look at that. It must work. Maybe you're not going to be able to do that kind of science with it. Is that science? Chemistry? But and who knows? Maybe in the future they'll develop things that now we can handle this. Okay, string theory. Of course, I don't know the latest, but when I last looked at it, it makes a lot of mathematical sense. It's too beautiful to not take seriously, but to be able to actually test it, at least when I last looked at it, it's a bit of a stretch. Can't quite test it yet, but it makes so much mathematical sense. And in the past, things that make mathematical sense, for some reason, eventually we were able to test it, physically.
I have an answer to the question. So yeah, tune in 2 weeks. We're going to do the last chapter of mechanistic and non-mechanistic science, and that will actually talk about scientific description, explanation of transcendental knowledge. So
yeah, so Sthita-dhi-muni had thought about that more than me, I'm sure. But I do have one more thing to say.
Okay.
But this isn't a strange thing, because we tend to think of modern chemistry and the atom and this and that as really solid knowledge. Through the 1800s, they had the periodic table of charts. I think mid-1800s. I forget the Russian guy's name. Maybe it began with an M. But and it made a lot of sense. These things they should be there. They had no way to test this until what's his name? The guy begins with J. Josephson, I think, at the Cavendish Labs with the electron, the cathode ray tube experiments. Then they started to be able to do experimentation, late 1800s, early 1900s, that there could be electrons, it could be this, could be that. Otherwise, it was all theorizing. It was just and the physicists were actually, this is just the chemist fantasizing. It's a nice idea. Everybody has their little evolutionary theory going on, But it works so well, the chemists went with it, but the physicists weren't able to deal with it until a good 50, 60, 70, years later. And then it becomes real for the physicist. So who knows what future science might look like.
Thank you.
All right.
On that note,
We're doing Prasad,
Christina
man.
said, June 10th is the last chapter, chapter 9, the epistemology of transcendental consciousness, presented by Christina Kelly. And can you just give a short bio of yourself, please?
Sure. So my name is Christina Kelly, and I've been at the Krishna House in Gainesville for the past year and a half. Just recently jumped on board the Bhaktivedanta Institute full time. I have a degree in linguistics from Harvard University, and then I spent 11 years working in the video games and technology sector in various disciplines, mostly involving communications, project management, that sort of thing. And and now I'm here studying spiritual philosophy and transcendental understanding, scientific knowledge. So it should be a really great time. So please, everyone, come back on June 10th at 11 a.m.
Thank you. Thank you, Christina. Okay, so we're looking forward to that. That's going to be a very nice event that we're going to have in person and also online. Tomorrow at 10 a.m. we have Leaps of Faith and Doubt with Pracharnanda Das. He's going to be speaking about time. And also, so Ashish, a question like this about consciousness and higher sensory and cognitive capacities. In June, we are expecting a visit by Panditi, and so we'll have some programs, and it'll be a perfect time to ask these kinds of questions. So we welcome you to come back to those, and we'll see you all in 2 weeks. Thank you very much.
I'd like to add one thing real quick, if I could, please.
Hi, Krishna.
Hi, I'm up in New York right now at my son's wedding, which I have to go right now. But let me just add that June 10th just happens to be Christina's birthday. Interestingly, the very first lecture we gave in this series was Sadhuputa's birthday. So it's a coincidence, but it's a happy coincidence. And so we are going to actually have a big pizza party, which those of you who are local are invited to. But please come even if you're not local. And as Brahma said, we'll fax you some pizza.
Okay, so Derek, if you will stay on for one moment, I'll send you the link. I'll stop the recording. And on our website, bihsstudies.org/events, we're going to have a registration form soon for coming here in person to the BIHS headquarters in Gainesville. So we look forward to seeing you either here or online. Thank you very much. Happy Saturday. Have a great weekend. We'll see you soon. Thank you again, Sthita-dhi. That was very lively.
Well, as long as they keep me in the movement, I'm down.
Thank you all very much. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna.